In particular, I spent it working in either a nonprofit, higher education, or I worked in state government with the state of Florida. And prior to that, I worked in the private sector, but always close to government. All of my customers that I handled in general were both the federal government, military, and also some international. So, so my background is not just accounting and auditing. It kind of spreads across other fields, logistics and procurement predominantly. And so I kind of bring a different perspective. I'm not your everyday normal accountant. And of course, I went back and got my PhD. It's not in accounting. My PhD is actually in public administration. And I got a postdoctorate in accounting and finance from the University of Florida just a couple of years ago. And of course, I maintain my CPA license. So it makes me a bit of an odd duck when it comes to my accounting colleagues. And I enjoy the AGA group. I was active in attending and being involved with folks in Brunswick, Georgia, when I was there, and I was glad to find out that there was an active chapter here in Chattanooga. So I really enjoyed visiting in person last year, and this is, well, I've sat through a number of webinars. This is going to be the first time I'm actually presenting in a webinar. So I look forward to the opportunity, and hopefully you'll find the topic interesting. I am always interested. I teach accounting information systems. And so I'm always interested in advances in technology and the use of data analytics. I spent a lot of time in my classes trying to preach the importance of understanding what data analytics is and then how to do it. And also spending a lot of time trying to teach the students how to learn how to use the tools. Because the learning of the tools, there's only so much learning you'll do in the classroom. A lot of the learning that goes on with these tools is through experimentation and trial and error and sharing of information among people. So this is kind of a 30,000-foot view of just the kind of the trends in public sector use of data analytics. There's a little bit of review in here. I suspect that many of you are going to know or be familiar with some of these things. But I know we all need to be going through CPE, and there'll be a time at the end where we'll have some discussion questions. And so I'd love to hear from you guys, some of your thoughts. And so there'll be some questions on the final slide.
Great.
So with that, I'm ready to go if you're ready.
All right, great. Yeah, so just like Dr. Cabrini just said, at the end, if you are on the phone, or if you're actually on your computer, we'll allow you to talk if you have any questions. If you don't want to talk on here, feel free to write your questions in the chat, and I'll kind of sift through those as Dr. Cabrini is going through his presentation. And like I said, we would love to hear from you. And Dr. Cabrini, take us away.
All right, cool. Well, the title to the presentation, Trends in Public Sector Use of Data Analytics, I don't think it's a stretch for anybody that's attending today to not have an appreciation for the power and need for use of data. But I tell you, in society in general, I think it's become much more obvious how important it is. COVID-19 has kind of changed the landscape for us, and everybody likes to keep track of how many new cases there are, how many hospitalizations, how many fatalities associated with COVID-19. And there's so much more behind that, so much more data behind that. There was just a study published recently that I guess was looking at blood types related to, are they finding any trends or patterns in whether a person's blood type is affecting how serious of an illness they can develop out of COVID-19. And so they're looking at this, and it's all driven by the availability of data. And so it becomes really critical. So the trend is, of course, there's an increase in the need for and the use of data analytics. And it's driven by both the availability of the data in its various forms, and also because of the available technology. Technology, of course, over time gets less expensive. And so now most people have Excel available to them on their own computers, their home computers, work computers. And so you have a lot of power inside Excel once you unlock it and you know how to use it. There's a pretty powerful add-on suite called for a data analytics package. And then there's also something called Inquire that's recently been added to Excel that even opens up more power. And then they've got something called the Power Pivot. And at some point, hopefully in the future, we can actually do some demonstrations on some of these techniques. Today is more informational. I'm hoping if I am invited to come back that we can do something more hands-on with some of these tools. So back in 2017, I wrote a piece that got published in something called Business Analytics. It's something the Dalton State College Wright School of Business publishes. It's available on our website. And in that fall edition of 2017, I wrote an article called Big Data and Small Government. And I was curious because I hear people talking about big data, and I was like, you know, why distinguish it? Data is data. And come to learn that big data is actually a term that was coined by NASA in a 1997 paper that was written on data visualization, which, if anybody's familiar with Tableau or Power BI, the use of those two products is for data visualization. It's the ability to be able to basically draw pictures with data. There are actually artists generating artwork using data. So it's kind of a fascinating field, but that is where the term big data came from. And big data is, in essence, as all of these different, consider them like silos or swimming pools just filled with information. They all used to be kind of standalone. Now there's power to be able to connect between all these different sources of data. And so now, instead of just having one server with data on that server, we can now connect to multiple servers that have data that we can interconnect with one another. And again, you're asking it questions. So the more data you have, the more variables that you have to work with, the more questions you can ask of it. And so it's a real big area in marketing. Marketing data analytics is huge. You know, again, each field, each area, each sector of the economy is trying to explore ways to be able to take advantage of this. And so in the public sector, for local government, state government, and federal government, it's important that we plan strategically to deploy and use data analytics to help us in govern. Now, I'm kind of a big fan of humor. So let's see here. I'm going to advance my slide if this works. There we go. Every Christmas, since my son was able to go and buy a Christmas gift for me, he gets me a new Dilbert calendar. And so I religiously read my Dilberts every day. And so I found some that I thought were appropriate and kind of humorous. And so this one here, the pointy-haired boss is talking to Wally, and he says, Wally, I need you to head up our artificial intelligence project. You'll have no budget and no hope of success. I just like saying we're working on it. And you're completely useless, so it's a good match. And Wally says, I won't let you down. So I don't know, but yeah, it's all about appearances. And this is, of course, a gross exaggeration, but I'd be surprised if there wasn't somebody out there in the audience today that hadn't known of an experience like this, where there was some kind of a project that existed, but it was really for show. They really weren't working on anything. There was something, I watched the series Mad Men on AMC and TV, and you know, they're an advertising firm, and they had the creative department that would come up with all the fancy commercials. But then there was another group, another person who was working with TV, radio, and was into data. Unfortunately, they did not have a computer system. And he used to go around talking about a computer system, that they were into data analytics and had a computer system. Unfortunately, nobody else inside the company knew that they didn't really have a computer. And so at one point they had promised to, I guess, give a tour to show off the computer, and they had to be told that there really wasn't a computer. And so again, things are done for appearances. It's kind of a form over substance issue, but it's kind of important. And I think it's humorous when it comes to the deployment of technology. Again, another one that I thought was pretty good, and this one goes to the point of, having bad data is worse than having no data at all. So, they want to answer some questions, so they try to find a database that will provide them the resources to be able to answer the question, but the databases are all wrong. So, somebody says, well, can't we just average them together? Well, you're taking bad numbers, your bad starting points, and you're averaging a bunch of bad starting points. That's not going to do anything for you. So Dilbert, of course, has a snarky reply that says, sure, I can multiply them too. And then finally, I think everybody has this, has a boss that maybe operates this way. I know I've had them in the past. But this is one where they talk about, we're going to manage by our instinct and gut feelings, as opposed to maybe using some data to help us or using facts to help us. Not that you can't make decisions with gut feelings or instincts, but it's usually better for, if you're going to have intuition help and guide you, usually that intuition is based on something. You don't want to be shooting from the hip or making decisions off the cuff, so to speak. And so I found these three particularly relevant for this topic, because with data, data is supposed to be there for us to analyze so that we can try to improve the decisions that we make. And so that's really kind of the importance of this. I wanted to just do kind of a personal reflection. I hope you guys don't mind. I went to college at Stony Brook University in New York from 1981 to 1985. And of course, I didn't own a computer. We didn't use computers. It was a typewriter and pencils, pens, and paper. That was it. And I think I took one programming class in something called PL1, which is called Plain Language 1 Programming. It was a new business language at the time. That was it was simpler to use than the old COBOL, which is a common business language that was widely used. In 1986, I got my first job with a company called Aerospace Avionics. And again, I had a desk and a phone, and I had access to what they called a dummy terminal. And so I could basically go to the keyboard, and it was a green screen, and you had the little green neon letters that would pop up on it. And you could basically query a database. It was an old IBM System 36, I believe it was. And so you'd be able to query it, run reports. And when you ran a report, of course, you didn't have a printer in your office or in your cubicle. It printed in a central location on green bar paper, and you'd wait hours for it, sometimes even the next day, before you'd actually see the report in your hands. So that's 1986. I remember it was probably during that same time frame that I actually saw my first personal computer. I believe it was an Apple II that one of my relatives had purchased. And I was always wowed and impressed with how powerful the Apple II was. Fast forward to 2000, I have my job with the state of Florida. I had moved from auditing to work as controller for the Division of Rehabilitation and Liquidation. During that time period, one of the projects I worked on was a systems acquisition and implementation project. We needed a new enterprise resource planning system. And so I gained a lot of experience working through that process and understanding just how important it is to integrate your information system across the organization, that it isn't just about accounting, it isn't just about procurement, it isn't just about logistics or human resources. It's the whole entire organization. You need to have a very holistic approach to the way you're going to treat technology. If you start if you stay within your silo, that usually does not lead to very good outcomes. And so there had been so much in the way of advances during that 14-year period. And then flash forward 20 more years, now I'm at Dalton State College, and I'm like, wow, we've got SAP, the world's largest, I guess, provider of enterprise resource planning. It's widely used here in the Dalton region because of the carpeting and flooring industry. It's widely used around the world. I'm getting a lot of training in it right now. There's also Oracle and their product NetSuite. They have a number of products out there, but NetSuite is their ERP software. And then a lot of small accounting firms who keep their books for their small clients use something called QuickBooks that probably most people are familiar with. And I've used QuickBooks. It's a fairly sophisticated little system. So there's just a lot of powerful tools out there, and then everything in between. So from QuickBooks all the way up to SAP, there are literally dozens, probably hundreds of suppliers of information systems that people can acquire, put in place, and hopefully help them to make better decisions. Now, government gets kind of a bum rap. People can often be critical. I teach a class in governmental accounting. I've also taught public management, and I have taught public budgeting. And I guess I'm not going to say that I'm shocked by it, but I'm always a little disappointed in people's level of understanding about what government does and how they function, and kind of the negative perceptions that they have about government. And so I spend a lot of time in those classes, not only trying to teach them the material in the book, but also trying to help them think a little bit more critically, using, more objective information than maybe what they were using to come up with the opinion they had in the first place, so that they understand why things happen the way they happen and why things work the way they work. And so when I came across this, I thought it was kind of funny. I'm a big lover of Far Side and comics like this, and so this kind of reminded me of something I would see on Far Side. So, but yeah, that poor dog there is being used as kind of the lever that's going to extract the money out of the guy's pocket to pay for all the services there. So I thought that was kind of cute. So just for some review, and I'm sure again that some of you are probably fully aware of this, but it's never a bad idea to go back and review it. First, what is data analytics? It's also data analysis. It's the process of inspecting, cleansing, transforming, and then modeling data for some purpose. And that's important to keep in mind, that this all starts out because you have something you want to get to. You shouldn't do something without having a reason. And that's no different with data analytics. It's really important that you define what it is you would like to get to. What destination do you have? And this way, that will guide you in terms of what data are you going to need, what tools are you going to use. And so in this, as you collect data, the cleansing process, or the scrubbing process as they call it, is to make sure that the data is usable, because a lot of data comes in and it's not in a condition that can be readily used to do analysis. And so you've got to go through and deal with some of the problems that exist. Sometimes in our classes at college, what we'll do is we will intentionally give our students bad data. And one of the ways that we will kind of assess them is on their ability to be able to first identify that they've got bad data, and then to go about trying to fix it. And then making the decisions on, can it be fixed, or does some of the data have to be removed? And then being able to think through what the impact of that's going to be on any analysis. Is it going to bias the analysis that you perform? Is it going to influence or affect the conclusions that you might reach? And so you have to make a judgment as to how usable that data is. And then the whole transforming process, it's kind of preparing it for being able to be used. I remember there was one project I worked on where we used a program called SAS, or SAS, to basically flip the data around. It could take it and almost like a contortionist, it could move the data around into different views so that you could have the variables where you needed them to be in order to be able to run your analysis. And so again, it's something you have to do with a lot of thought because you need to know where you're at and you need to know where you want to be before you get in there and start kind of doing your contortions with the data. But you know, it's a powerful tool that if you were to do this by hand, I'm not sure that you would. You know, I think it would be so time prohibitive and cost prohibitive that you just couldn't do it. So some real powerful stuff out there. But there are four types of data analytics that have been identified. You've got your descriptives, like, you know, things like mean, median, mode. You've got diagnostic, okay, where you're trying to determine, you know, what's happening. You're drilling down, looking for causes. You've got predictive, where you're looking for most likely to happen. And then you've got prescriptive, which is actually moving from what's likely to happen to what do I do about it? And so as you move from descriptive to prescriptive, the value of the analytic increases, and so does the complexity. You know, if you have Excel, it's easy to do descriptive work, okay? It's a little bit harder to do the diagnostic work, but it can be done. You typically want a more advanced product than Excel to do some of the diagnostic work. You can even do some predictive work in Excel with the data analytics package that you can add to it. It'll allow you to run regressions and other statistical tests, which could give you some power, predictive power, but you're better off using something like SPSS or Stata, or there's a number of different statistical packages out there. And then, of course, prescriptive, where it's telling us what we need to do, that starts to skirt the idea or the issue of there's some kind of intelligence behind this. And so we see this a lot in the healthcare field. I know in the three colleges I've been involved with since I graduated from FSU, that the nursing programs have been very involved with this area of prescriptive analytics in using it to help the healthcare practitioners in assessing, both doing diagnostic and being able to get to the point where the machines can help them determine what actions they need to take to help the patient. And so I think you can see some parallels where that might come in handy, even in the public sector, if we get to the point where we can use this prescriptively. So how would local government use data analytics? Okay, well, you certainly don't want to fall into the trap of just doing the same thing over and over again. It's not likely that you're going to see much improvement if that's the strategy that you take. It's easy to fall into that because it's comfortable. But the goal, and I think I've been in the readings I've been doing online, there's been a lot that's written about trying to get to this idea of seamless operations, trying to create connectivity between the different functions within an organization. And the same thing that's going on in the private sector side, I think is trying to happen or occur within the public sector side. Of course, in government, much more so than the private sector, we're always concerned about the issues of transparency and accountability. The public always seems to want increased transparency, and there is always the concern about sufficiency in terms of the accountability. Who can they hold accountable for things? And so these are some potential areas where data analytics can be used in the public sector. Now, from the academic standpoint, and being now an academic, I have a hard time getting away from that, but the National Academy of Public Administration, they have identified 4 pillars of public administration. And 3 of these are critical because they fit in with auditing. The last one, we're not as concerned with in auditing, but I think in policy making and decision making is very important. But we have effectiveness, efficiency, economy, and social equity. And I think that in thinking about it, and again, I'm just beginning to think about this, when thinking about what social equity is, and then trying to determine, well, how could we use data analytics? How can we employ data to help us in terms of governing towards this idea of social equity? And I think there's some interesting questions there that need to be raised, because we don't want to be making decisions based on uh, perceptions or mere opinion. We want to make sure that the decisions that we're making, the policy decisions that we're bringing forth, are being made based on fact, based on the truth of what's occurring, based on uh, empirical observation. And so that is the way I think we can truly move towards having more social equity out there, where things are more balanced. And trying, it's very difficult. I'm sure folks out there have been watching the news. I try to avoid it, but I get curious about it, and I do watch some. Some of the images are hard to watch. Some of the protests, I guess it's a throwback. My parents grew up in the 60s, and so there was a lot of civil unrest there for good reason. We have our own civil unrest for good reason. Uh, but I think that maybe through the use of data analytics, we can come up with some better solutions. It's not going to cure what ails men's hearts, but maybe it will provide some solutions that could help us to move forward. So I think these are avenues where government can explore the use of data analytics to help improve their ability to govern. Now, I was looking up for Tennessee. I wanted to get a sense for, where money is being spent, what types of services. And so there's a group called the Sycamore Institute. I believe they're over in Nashville, Tennessee, and they produce a lot of information that is kind of useful in terms of understanding the situation in the state of Tennessee. And so this came out in 2017. It was based on expenditures from both county governments and special districts, and then also municipalities. And so you see from the first circle there that a lot of the money in municipalities is spent on utilities, followed by what they call all other services, which is a lot of your general operating type areas. It probably also includes things like the recreation, parks and recreation, and so forth. The health and public services, safety and security, and education. On the county side, a lot of money spent in education. That's no big surprise. More money is spent on the health and public and social services, which is not a surprise either, because a lot of that money flows down, I guess, from the federal government and from the state governments. And then a little bit gets spent on general government, and then a myriad of other programs that the county might have. And then you can look at the overall picture begins to balance out once you start combining everybody. But to me, the most interesting thing is to look at the individual, the municipal governments versus the county governments, and you really get a sense, an average person looking that should get a good sense for what their local governments are doing. It shouldn't take a lot to be able to understand what education refers to or what public safety is referring to. If anybody driven around and seeing the fire department or police cars going around, that's where your 11% is being spent. And so, but the gist here is that there's just so much there's so many transactional connections here that you have to begin to identify this as possible data. There's so much data embedded behind these numbers, and there's just a lot of power that's residing in there in being able to answer questions. And that's part of how we want to get to it. This one is interesting. This came out of a presentation that I saw that was over in England, in a community outside of London. And they were developing a taxonomy of local government data use. And when I looked at it, I was like, wow, this is really pretty similar to what we would be dealing with here. And so, they've identified all the different types of sources of data. Where is data going to come out of? And so we have all of our administrative and operational areas. We've got service delivery information. There's stuff from web data, sensors. I'm going to talk about something in a few minutes about this issue of sensors and how it's being used in local government. Citizen-generated, crowdsourced type data, the partners, so police, schools, health, housing, charities. So there's all these different sources of data. There's that cleansing process. They talk about you're having to cleanse it, standardize it, linking it, getting it ready to be used so that you can then deploy it into the different tools that you have available, and then how you're going to use it, from anything from just monitoring situations all the way to making decisions. And then there's the old feedback loop that comes back, because again, you're always having to assess, is the data any good? Is it really allowing you to get to the answers that you really need? Are the answers the right answers? Because again, if you reach the wrong conclusion, it could very well be because you started off with some bad data. And I think the big takeaway here, I don't think any of this is really a big surprise. If you take in college classes, any kind of computer or information systems classes, or, which a lot of college programs these days have, the key here is that there is so much that you need to know. Each one of these things, in terms of identifying and taking advantage of the various sources where you're going to get data from, to be able to work with the data, to get it into a usable state, takes a certain amount of expertise, a certain skill level. To be able to utilize the tools, all right, you have to be able to understand and use each of the different types of tools that are available to perform these different types of analyses. And then to be able to jump from using the tool to the output. What are you getting out of this? And then being able to interpret it to apply it. That takes another set of skills. And so there's a lot of training and education that goes on. Some of that is occurring in colleges and universities today. For those of us that are older, like myself, I would put myself in that category. I had to do a lot of catching up. I knew manually how things work because that's how I was trained coming up. But I had to adjust as I entered each new environment, and each new environment presented another level of sophistication in terms of where they were with their maturity, with using data and using technology. I had to adapt and learn. And so it's kind of become this part of this continuing learning process that we sometimes hear about. And that's because this is changing all the time. We're learning new things. And so, and hopefully it'll keep us fresh too. I find that it kind of keeps me a little on the young side. I know some of my colleagues think I'm a lot younger than I am. I guess you guys can't see me, but some people think I look younger than my 57 years. And so, but I can tell you what, I don't always feel it. There were a couple of interesting articles that I found that I wanted to share, and I'll make the slides available if anybody wants them, and I can provide any other additional information if anybody cares to read up on it. But in 2018, there was an article that came out through through Government Technology, which is a neat website that's online. It's just govtech.com. And this was an article about how to do data analytics in government. And the focus was on optimizing services and activities, trying to take advantage of ways to take the human element out of certain parts of it and apply the human element to other parts of it. So it's like focusing your efforts on the really important things. So they want to take advantage as much as possible of machine learning and artificial intelligence to get things ready for people to actually maybe look at exceptions, manage the real hard questions that they need to answer, rather than on maybe some of the more of the mundane or day-to-day activities that are going on. But again, to be able to get to this point where we're able to deploy machine learning and artificial intelligence, it's going to require systematic and strategic planning and execution to get there. And of course, it's going to require money. The process that Jessica Gubert had laid out in this article was kind of that systematic process that you have to go through. That, you know, first you have to identify the problem, you have to go through and assess data readiness. And again, that's, do you have the right data? Is it available in a format that you can get access to and into your system? What's the scope of your project? So in answering that question, you're going to be looking at what goals do you have set? What actions are you going to need to take? What specific parts of the data, what variables are you going to need? And then what form of analysis are you going to have to do? I know when I went through my training, one of the more challenging aspects of learning quantitative methods was you were given all of these different methods, but you couldn't just choose any method and use it. Each method had limitations. And so you had to match up your question, the data you had, to the appropriate method. So you had to be able to recognize which method is going to be the one that's going to get you to the right answer. Because if you mismatch your data, your questions, and the method, you're going to end up with results that you will get results, but they won't actually mean anything. But you may not know that they don't mean anything. And if you're communicating this to people, they won't know that it doesn't mean anything. I hate to say this because I don't like to inject politics, but I think we've all seen enough of what happens when misinformation gets out among the masses. And that seems to be happening a lot these days. So at any rate, then you want to have a pilot project. Yeah, whenever you come up with something new, and I'm pretty sure most organizations work this way, you're going to take a little piece of it. It's kind of like when you're going to clean the surface of something and you get a new cleaner to use, you usually test it on a spot that nobody can see. Does it work out okay? Does it do any damage? Does it stain anything, bleed anything through? As long as it works fine, then you can go ahead and you can roll it out. You do the same thing with technology. Pilot project first, and then implement to scale. And so I said I was going to mention an example. Living here in Dalton, you know, the utilities company got involved in the whole smart meters. And so they were re-hooking up all of the residences in all of Dalton with these smart meters. And they basically followed this process. They needed to be able to manage this resource, the power, the electricity, more effectively, more efficiently. And so in order to do that, they needed more information, they needed more data. And the existing monitoring tools they had available were not sophisticated enough to do it. And so they identified that, okay, we now need a project. So they had a goal, okay, they wanted to become more efficient at managing energy needs. They developed their action plan. They identified what data they were going to need and what analysis they were going to be performed. And at the same time, they were working through what technology are they going to bring to bear on it. And so they started installing these smart meters. They did it in a pilot project first, tested it out to see if it worked. It did. And then they rolled it out across the whole city. And so now everybody has smart meters. And I thought it was really neat. I took a tour of Dalton Utilities as part of the Citizens Government Academy last year. And I was super impressed with the sophistication of our utility, just how much they knew about their own business. And a lot of it was driven by the fact that they are collecting a lot of data. And it's not just data like, accounts payable data or accounts receivable data or revenues coming in data. It's data like video of the sewers and pipes and things like that. They have these little crawlers that they can send down there that have cameras on them, and they report video back, but they're also recording things. And so they're able to collect a lot of visual data of infrastructure to be able to do assessments on the physical condition. It gives them, when they begin to put these variables together, it allows them to get to that predictive state where they can start to look at, how long do we think this is going to last? When do we think it's going to need to be serviced? And then, of course, it gets to that prescriptive state where it begins to maybe point them in the direction that says, hey, you need to take this action or this other action. And so I was really impressed in the area of utilities with just how much they're beginning to use this kind of technology. The second article by Jane Wiseman I thought was interesting because it was really getting at the heart of what's the value of data analytics. And so she had basically attacked it from three different levels. She first was financial. And in the financial area, what she was focused on was, fraud prevention and detection. Also trying to make government more efficient, and then the idea of wanting to be accurate and complete. And by complete, it was more of you want to reduce, say, the uncollectible accounts, the taxes that are supposed to be received in there. So, if you're able to maximize your collections on that end from citizens, then that only provides you with more resources. We preach the same thing in the private sector as well. Managing that that risk of having receivables that are owed to you being uncollectible is extremely important. So having good credit policies and being smartly aggressive about collecting it. There was a story where it was something simple. The director of finance for a particular city put a personalized Post-it note, attached it to each of the bills that was going out to the citizens, that made kind of an appeal for them to pay their bills. And they noticed that that year collections went up. They had far fewer delinquent accounts after the payments were due than they had in previous years. So they attributed that to this personal appeal that was made by the finance director. So, you never know. It doesn't always have to be a sophisticated solution. It doesn't necessarily need to be high tech. This was a Post-it note. Then you had operational issues, and they're always operational tends to surface and focus on efficiency and safety. Again, my trip to the utilities, safety was a big deal with them. They track a lot around days and hours between injury. They it's factories do the same thing. They post that information. My wife, she works at Mohawk, and that's a big factor there on the factory floor is, when was the last accident? They spend a lot of time on accident prevention. And a lot of that comes from looking at data and trying to improve operations to make the shop floor safe for people. And then finally, something very important to government, again, it comes back to trust, which is a function of transparency. If people can see what you're doing, right, they're more likely to be trustful. If you hide things from them, that's when they become distrustful. I saw this actually in a church setting that I belong to. I ended up on a budget committee. And I remember at the time we were debating about how much information to provide the congregation in regards to the current year's budget that was coming up for a vote. And I had said, well, I thought it was kind of obvious. The answer was obvious. You provide them all of the information. And the pastor was like, no, 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 no. We don't want to provide them all the information. We want to give them as little information as we can get away with, because they'll just ask more questions if we give them data. And I looked at him and I said, well, isn't that the point of having a meeting where we're going to talk about the budget? And, apparently they did not want to have to deal with the tough questions that were going to come from the parishioners in the church. So I got kind of a little life lesson there on what even can go on inside of a church in terms of information that they might be hiding from the congregation. And like I said, that could build up suspicion. And if you're not being transparent and people are suspicious of you, they're not going to trust you. And so that begins to build a wall between your congregants and with the staff. And the same thing happens within a city or a county. If there's a lot of information that isn't being made available, if you're not being very transparent, it kind of creates an environment where trust is not going to grow, and good relationships will not blossom. The last article was interesting because it's international in flavor. This is a group, the Asian Pacific Productivity Organization, that basically operates from the Eastern Mediterranean all the way to the Pacific. And the gentleman here, Jinwok Choi, who wrote this piece, I thought it really kind of solidified the idea that the world is getting smaller, that we all have similar concerns, that whether you're in China or Japan or in Pakistan, then you're operating in local government, the concerns don't really change. Okay, and politics might change, the brand of politics might change, religion might change, but the core issues of governing don't change. And so his thing was focus on making objective, rational decisions. And the object here is that if you're going to make objective, rational decisions, that has to be based on evidence. And the evidence needs to be systematic, needs to be valid, and it needs to be reliable. And so the whole thing was pointing towards the use of data. And so the use of data, the collection of data through the use of technology, and then using the power of data analytics. But the one thing he wanted to spend time talking about in his paper were some of the challenges. And the way he saw it, some of the challenges came in the form of training and education, that it's likely that there might not be sufficient training and education available to public employees so that they will know the basics of how to work with the data, how to work with the tools to work with the data, that local governments might not have the digital infrastructure in place to be able to handle this kind of intensive data work, that there may be a problem with data integration or sharing, and this is more of a cultural issue. I had a lot of friends in law enforcement throughout the state of Florida at the state level. They worked in motor carrier compliance or in the state police, and then I had friends in local police, friends in FDLE. And what you got a sense of is they all tended to operate in their individual silos, and that for certain things they would cooperate, but there was always kind of a distrust. And then if you throw in the locals and then throw in the feds, then you have a lot of different things going on, and everybody's kind of holding cards close to the chest. And so there isn't this culture of openness and sharing to be able to solve problems. And we see this happen when we look at some of the events that have occurred where law enforcement has worked together. One of the chief criticisms that seems to come out every time in kind of the post-evaluation of an event is that some of the problems that existed were these silo mentalities that are created inside organizations, and this distrust of letting people know what it is you have, holding some of it back, because it's through those connections, it's through the interconnectivity that you end up gaining new knowledge. And that new knowledge may be the difference between you being able to solve a problem or prevent a problem from occurring. And so that becomes very important. And lastly, he focused on something called capacity. And capacity goes back to something that developed early on with the discussion of big data called the 4 V's. And the 4 V's stand for velocity, volume, value, and oh, my senior moment here, I'm forgetting what the last V stood for. Variety. That was it, variety. So velocity, volume, variety, and value. And so volume, of course, has to do with how much data. Velocity is the speed with which you can work with the data. The variety is the different types of data, because data is not just numbers and letters. It can be all kinds of data. Right now, they're using a lot of video for data. And then value stands for the fact that we don't want to work with data that is meaningless. We don't want to just work with data for the sake of working with data. We want to actually have a reason for it. Oops, that didn't work. Okay, so what's the current state? I don't know how many of you have gone to the Gartner Group. Gartner Group is a great group. They do a lot of consulting. They've got a government and public sector, and they did an analysis, and they reported that they estimate that 80% of government organizations are still at what they call the initial or developing digital maturity stage. So it's just a way to gauge. You could personally kind of gauge yourself, your own organization, as to where you think you are in terms of the level of sophistication or in the level of maturity in terms of digital. And there actually is a kind of a measurement scale that you can use to assess that. Now, I identified some challenges myself differently than the paper that I read. And these come from the article I wrote back in 2017. And so some of the challenges that I saw personally when I was working in government, one of them was support from the top. When we were going to purchase the new ERP system, one of the challenges I had was gaining that support from the top. So getting the director of the agency to buy into the fact that we needed to spend money to be able to save money. And I did have to sell him on that fact, that this wasn't just to spend money for no reason, that we were actually going to become more efficient, and becoming more efficient, that reduction in transactions, the length of time that we have to spend processing things, was actually going to convert into savings that would be very tangible savings. In local governments, I think it's increasingly important to have the support of citizens because we can see what happens when citizens don't support what's going on with government. We're also dealing in a time where we seem to be suffering from some political extremism, not taking any sides here, but it is part of the environment that's out there right now. And when you're dealing with extremism, sometimes the extremism is causing people to go all in one way or all in another way without necessarily seeing that there are solutions somewhere else, not necessarily in their corner. You also have just general political, social, and economic uncertainty out there, a la COVID-19 and what we're dealing with here. When are we going to get back to normal? And then a lack of technology. Not all governments are equal when it comes to the availability of technology. And then decentralized data ownership. Lots of folks own their own data, and it's in varying states, being stored in various ways. So it may not be easy to get to. It may not be easy to integrate. And then there's just the general budgetary pressure. Revenues have been declining, I guess, for the last 10 to 12 years. And, and I know at the university, at the college where I'm at, we're under tremendous budgetary pressure. And then the lack of expertise. So, not that people aren't smart folks, they are smart, they're good at doing their job, but now you may want them to do something else. And to do that something else, they're going to need to be given opportunities to train and educate themselves to get to the point where they can actually do it. And so those are just some of the challenges that I think are being faced in the public sector when it comes to being able to move more strongly toward being more data analytic, getting to the point where we can do some more machine learning and maybe even start to experiment with some artificial intelligence in our field. Some of the typical tools that are out there, and some that I'm exploring right now, and some that I hope to be able to explore with you. Under the enterprise resource planning, I identified kind of 4 major suppliers of systems to governments. And so one is SAP. They've got 2 systems out there. There's kind of a legacy system called ERP, and then they've got a newer system that's out there called S4HANA. S4 is the system, HANA is the database that operates the system. Oracle has something called NetSuite that I'm also learning to work in. There's another company called CGI Inc. that seems to, their major customers tend to be government, and they provide enterprise-wide systems. And then something called OpenGov that used to be STW Inc. They're out of Texas, and they provide a lot of software solutions. And this one was interesting because it got its start from a bunch of academics who happen to be studying technology needs of government. And so this, I guess, this company formed, and they have a whole host of products and consulting services that they provide. Over on the analytic application side, I've mentioned some of these. For statistics, you can use something like SAS, Stata, or SPSS, and that's basically in order of difficulty, more difficult to less difficult. At SAS is a difficult program to learn. It requires you to learn some programming language. Stata is a little less user-friendly than SPSS. SPSS is probably the most user-friendly, but I'd say Stata is more powerful than SPSS. And SAS, of course, is the most powerful of the three. Then you've got Tableau and Power BI, which are your visualization softwares. Then you've got IDEA and ACL, which are common softwares used in the audit arena. It allows us to do a lot of data analytics. It allows us to pull samples. We can pull statistical samples, non-statistical samples, stratified samples. Whatever we need to do, we can do it through those two softwares and run a lot of statistical tests with them. We can also link them up with the visualization software, either Tableau or Power BI, to create more visual imagery that can have a lot of power in terms of dealing with our audience. Excel and Access, most people are accustomed or know about those. Excel is the workbook, the flat file. Access is a relational database. Visio provides the ability to be able to do a lot of mapping. So you can do flow charts, data flow diagrams, REA diagrams. There's lots of different ways that you can use Visio. Now, VBA, R, and Python are all programming languages. VBA exists inside Excel and Access. So it's called Visual Basic for applications, and the applications are Excel and Access. R is a free share program out there that people are writing statistical programs with. And then Python is really popular. I know in our MGIS program, our own computer science folks, a lot of folks are studying and learning Python. So there's lots of tools, lots of education needed to be able to work in these areas. And then finally, this was out of Australia, of all things. They had a meeting of local government folks, and they got together and they did these diagrams of, kind of where they saw government now and where they saw it going in the future. And so if you're looking, and I'm looking in the left upper column, and it's kind of says in the pink there, that's kind of your current, where you are currently, and then it moves to the other colors in terms of where are you moving to. And so if you're down in the lower portion, the lower right portion, you see where you've got kind of a network, a synaptic network. So there's lots of thinking points, and everything is networked together. It's a creative approach. And so we move from maybe more inflexible decision-making silos to something that's more network-oriented, much more flexible, able to react more quickly to things, and maybe promotes more creativity in decision-making. There's also a lot of this citizen-involved decision-making, getting citizens more involved, which, as I have learned in studying this subject matter, is a lot easier said than done. There's a lot of citizens out there who don't get involved. The next one that they posted was this one, where they were asked to look ahead even further to 2040 and identify where they saw government being in terms of what they were going to look like, how they were going to be functioning, what were going to be some of the issues. And of course, the big one was the aging of the population. And so that was a huge one up there front and center. And then the idea of being more nimble, being able to react quickly to situations. Again, decentralization, the engagement area, kind of that peach area up there. So they see a lot more participation in 2040. Now, who knows what'll happen? I guess they're going to save these things, and they'll be able to, people will be able to look back on them and say, well, see where those people thought back in 2017, where we were going to be. will they actually be there? Who knows? So at any rate, so we've come to the end of this, and I like this. This came from a Career Builder commercial. So guy comes in to make the presentation, and the news isn't all good, and so the boss monkey goes up and he flips the chart around, and they all have a party in there. So a lot of it is perception, and so there's lies, damn lies, and there's statistics. Statistics are not inherently bad. It's just that they can be abused and misused. And so in this case, the boss monkey there was misusing the data because he liked the graph pointing up instead of down. And so a simple fix was just to flip the chart. So with that, I had a series of discussion questions. I didn't know if anybody wanted to participate a little bit and share thoughts. But some of the questions I had written down is, how would you assess your organization's digital maturity? How sophisticated is your organization's use of data analytics? What are the key impediments in your own mind and your own experience? How do you assess your own talents? And then what training do you think you need, or what training do you want? And so these are kind of questions that are just open for discussion if we have time. Chris, how are we doing on time?
We're doing pretty good. We're a little over our hour, but I think it's a great opportunity for those who are on here who want to ask questions. If you want to ask questions, you can write them in the chat or raise your hand, and I can bring you up to talk. Just let me see. Oh, we've got excellent presentation. Thanks, Frida. We appreciate it. That was an excellent presentation. Anybody want to ask any questions? Or we can, if you want to, we can, if you want to send your questions to me or Dr. Gabrini, we can answer those offline, and we'll get you a response back.
Sure, my email address is real easy. It's just cgabrini@daltonstate.edu.
Yeah, and like Dr. Gabrini said, we will make sure that we send out the slide deck along with this video as well, so that you can go back and view it later. I think we'll wait just a second. Let's see.
Yeah, there's always so much to cover.
I know.
Of course, professors have the gift of gab.
That's great. It's great information. It's really eye-opening to see all the different facets of data analytics. So,
well, I get real enthused about speaking to you guys because I have a heart for what you guys do, and I think you guys do a great job. And
appreciate it.
More kudos and more pats on the back for the hard work that you do for the citizens in your jurisdictions.
Yeah,
so
appreciate it.
Lucky to have good public servants, and so.
All right. Well, I don't know if we have any more questions. Any final words? I know we will be. Today is this month is our October meeting. We probably will not be doing a November meeting, since that's going to be around Thanksgiving. We'll probably pick back up in December. December will be a little different as far as what we do for Christmas, since we are socially distancing. We will still have a Christmas party, but it's going to be virtual. So that's going to be really exciting. Hopefully, Dr. Gabrini, you'll come back to our virtual Christmas party and be our guest. But any final words do you have for us before we end?
Well, just, I hope everybody stays safe, and I really do hope and pray that we can get back to normal and get back to face-to-face meetings. I bet you everybody misses lunch.
We do.
The last time I was there, you guys had a really nice spread there.
I know. So. I miss it. I miss the fellowship and just seeing everybody's smiling faces. But hopefully, during the December meeting, it won't be in this style. We will be able to see everybody. So hopefully you come with your Christmas sweaters on and we'll be able to have some dialogue here and be able to see everybody's face. So,
Yeah, and
um,
if anybody has any preferences about future topics that they want to see
yes,
addressed, or specifically about the hands-on, if there's something specific they want to learn how to do, they can forward that to you, and you can get that to
yes,
me, and I'll take a look at it and see if we can't address that. So if there's some
perfect.
specific requests, we certainly can take care of that.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Gabrini. We appreciate you. I appreciate everybody that was on the call today. If you were on this call, you will receive your CPE certificate in the next day and a half. So if you again, if you have any questions, shoot them to me. I'll shoot you out Dr. Gabrini's contact information. He'll send me a slide deck, and I'll shoot it back out to everyone along with the recording. All right. Well, everybody, I pray that you have a wonderful day. Thank you again, Dr. Cabrini.
Yeah, thank you. I
All right.
appreciate you having me here to speak.
All right. Bye-bye.